Hello, everyone, and welcome to the actual story of actual play. It is your host, as always, Jake, and today I am joined by Peter from Sponsored by Nobody. Hello.
Hi there. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for coming on. Could you give me and everyone watching an introduction about who you are and sort of all the many things that you do about actual play?
Hi, so I'm Peter from Sponsored by Nobody, also known as Piotr or the Yahoo Online. And yeah, I am part of the Sponsored by Nobody podcast group. We're an audio-only podcast, a little bit of a hobby setup. We're not big professional voice acting, whatever. We're just casual players playing with each other online and what have you. We're based out of the Greater Vancouver area in BC, Canada. And yeah, we've been at this for a few years now. We're a variety RPG gaming show, pretty much.
I haven't really heard of many people who invite their audience to participate in the games and in the shows and stuff. Can you share some maybe memorable experiences or how has that been in general?
Well, in general, we have a small niche community. We have a small fan Discord. There's not many people, so we get to interact with the same people over and over. We get to know them, and then we say, "Hey, why not try this? Why not reach out to people and bring them over?" It only started. There was another podcast called A Pair of Dice Lost, which got started because the GM there listened to our podcast, got inspired, made their own stuff. So they were doing some of similar games to what we were doing, and they're like, okay, we could use another GM because one of our main GMs is a little bit tired, needs a small break. So I just on a whim just reached out to Brandon over there and, hey, would you like to play a game with us? And he was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. And navigating over a little bit of awkwardness and what have you, it really kicked off, and we made one of our better games, was City of the Bull God in Exalted vs. World of Darkness.
That's awesome. Having a show branch off of your show and then getting them on that's awesome. That sounds amazing. So you mentioned you were an audio only podcast, and could you maybe go in a little bit of depth about the advantages and disadvantages and sort of challenges that an audio-only podcast faces when doing TTRPG stuff?
Yeah, well, we mostly started as an audio-only podcast because some of our players like to keep their personal life separate from their online life. So it was pretty much a necessity. We go by first names, and not a lot of people from our podcast share this as online. I'm the exception because I've already been online before then, so I might as well continue. So the main challenge here is that you have to convey a lot more information through audio. So telling people to explain what you're doing. When someone's speaking, you can't just rely on your voice conveying who you are, because it's kind of hard to associate who's who at times. So you have to as I say, you need to name drop yourself. My character does this. I Azazel, go and punch this person, and so on, so people have more association with what your voice is and who your character is.
Sure.
You don't have the gesticulation that you can have in the recorded medium, so you need to convey that also. Describe how you're multi, I'm looking over at you, you look really pissed, let's talk about this a little bit. And similarly, we can't rely on props or recording. We could do some virtual tabletops and whatever. We haven't looked at that setups yet, so we're mostly doing mind-eye theater games and what have you. For example, Dimension 20, they put a lot of effort into playing their minis, setting everything up, making everything look really nice and presentable. We can't rely on that. So that also affects the kind of content we're doing. like we found out pretty early that combat is really hard to make engaging in audio only. So that's why we're playing games where combat doesn't take as much time or flows better or is more narrative perhaps. So you can listen to it and then be engaged just by that without having the visuals of like, oh, where the characters are positioned in relation to one another, how the minis are moving, how many, things like that. Because, you can't rely on that as an audio-only podcast, unfortunately.
For sure, and we'll get into that a little bit later about these alternate systems, because I'm very interested in hearing about that and how the different combat systems work. But could you talk a little bit about something that you mentioned in sort of our text exchange when we were talking before this, about inspiring indie game developers, like by playing their games and giving feedback and such? Because like so far everyone I've talked to have been have only played official licensed games, right? So this about playing indie games and like actually having an impact on it is something I'm totally new to and would love to hear about.
Well, yeah, and pretty much when you're playing a smaller game, even if you're a small podcast like ourselves, you might be the only actual play of their game. So this might be the only way for people that can't play this game is to engage with the system. Like, in general, we are known for some of our Exalted content, which is a bigger game. It used to be like the second biggest game rivaling D&D for a while. Now it's a little bit waned. But also we play like some homebrews like Exalted versus World of Darkness, which is someone took the storyteller system and hacked it to add Exalt in for them to wreck house. Or we have a small game like Fellowship, which is a powered by the Apocalypse game made by Velmini. Really fun system. But I think we're the only actual play podcast, except for the other ones that we've inspired to also pick it up and so on. Yeah, when you're dealing with a small audience, when you're dealing with a small creator, they tend to notice that you're playing them. If they listen to any podcast at all, they might listen to your podcast. Or if you send them feedback, like at the end of our show, we tend to do, okay, let's talk about the system, what we liked, what are the problems. Or if there's something really big that comes up, we make a list and actually forward it to the people. Say, hey, this is our feedback. This is some probably more playtest than you've gotten so far, because if you're a small developer, it's hard to get too many people to play with you. It's usually a small group and so on and so on. And yeah, they might appreciate the feedback, or they might be interested in how we played it, and then address some of the problems that might have come up. For example, we've been playing Exalted vs. World of Darkness. It's a storyteller system, and the creator took the basic crafting system there, was like, oh, let's take mage system, which has some ability to make wondrous magical items, and let's just copy that over here. Let's remove some limitations because we're better than those mages, and let's not look at the system because, hey, obviously it works if it's an official published White Wolf, Onyx Path, whoever released this mage, it should work. Turns out it's really broken. So like, oh, here, I made a magical wand that can kill a group of enemies and also freeze them in time and shrink them and also do some other shenanigans. And how many I can make? I can make like 5 of these a day. Just nuclear warheads in the palm of your hand. Like, oh, that obviously isn't very well balanced. So yeah, the creator listened to that, had a small shock of horror, and then, okay, I'm going to make a whole chapter about how to make more bespoke, more interesting systems out of that.
That's really fascinating. I noticed when I did my, when I was doing my research on you and your show, and your shows, I should say, right? Because you played quite a variety of things. Yep. I noticed that you tend to play things that are more like high power games. And so I was wondering, what sort of qualities or elements are you looking for when looking for a system to play for your actual play? Like, are you always looking for high power? Is that like a requirement, or is that just because the high power systems tend to also be high RP systems?
It's mostly that we enjoyed that kind of gameplay from Exalted. Mostly that I think was the main inspiration. Or one of our GMs had a campaign way back when that I think he called like Epic Evil, where you start as a 20th level character and you have big schemes to like take off the world, change the nature of the universe. I don't know, create a new race, what have you. And that thing kind of fell apart because you didn't have the actual mechanics for everything there. So we tend to gravitate to systems that support that. For example, one of the things we enjoyed for a long while was Goldbound, which is an OSR system made by Sign Nominee, made by Kevin Crawford, and it is pretty much meant to be, you start as an equivalent of 20th level D&D character, and you go from there. But also we remove a lot of baggage, a lot of crunch, all of the small stuff you just, ignore. Like in that game, okay, you can have terrain, but the terrain doesn't matter because you have characters that can punch through solid walls, fly, move mountains and what have you. So don't sweat the details, it doesn't matter. Like one big thing we liked about the system was that you had a system for changing the world. Like if you wanted to make, a Sorcerer's Academy with 10,000 students in it to have, 10,000 mages at your disposal at any time, sure. This is how you do it. This is how much it costs you. This is how much it will take for you to accrue that power and what you need to do for it, and so on. Which allowed us to put the sort of big plans, big ambitions into actual game with some kind of structure to it. Because sure, you can have a GM hand wave, like, oh, sure, it'll take you a month to do this, or whatever. It's like, it doesn't feel as concrete as you saying, yes, the system tells me it will going to take me this much, therefore I accomplish it, therefore it's a concrete thing I accomplish. Like in D&D, if you attack someone, you have a concrete result. They are dead. The system tells you they are dead. There's no GM, maybe not, like, no, I cut their head off, they are dead, unless magic, whatever. But other part of the system goes like, oh, like if you want to influence someone, roll it, and maybe the GM will agree with you, but maybe there's this and that. So like, unless the system has a concrete outcome out of an action, it doesn't feel like something you can rely on, which like what we like in Goldbound Heavy. But also we look at other systems as well, because often our games start with, okay, I'll have an idea for this cool setting, setup, or what have you. Like, oh, I want to play Star Trek. What games support Star Trek? Let's look at them. Okay, there's some Star Trek Adventures. There's a Torch ship that's upcoming, we're really excited for. But there's also, okay, what do we want to do in Star Trek? Like, oh, I want to have some games about exploring places. I want to make friends. I want to be able to convince people. So maybe we look at something like Fellowship that supports exploration, traveling, that supports you solving problems via intelligence, via talking, and what have you. And they have as concrete solutions as you'd have with punching them. And that also works. So sometimes we couple things together and that. Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
So would you say that, like, if perhaps someone watching this is someone looking to do an actual play, right? They have their people together and they're setting it up and they're looking for a system to play. What would you say is like the best way to find your ideal system for the game you're trying to play is?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Because first of all, if you want to do an actual play podcast and you want it to become commercially viable, you want to find an audience, then unfortunately you have to look at what the audience wants. Because I found it myself watching a few actual plays, and I think in general the market shows that people like watching what they know. So if people know D&D, they want to watch D&D because they understand it, and it's not as much of a hurdle to explain what does it mean when I speak softly or look closely at something and what have you, which are fellowship terms. So yeah, if you want to make it commercial, go with something that's popular, I guess, and look from there. However, if it's more hobby stuff like what we're doing, and you want to have more fun with the systems, well, like, the recommendation is to know more systems so that you'll be able to pick and choose from what fits what you're going to, which is unfortunately a hard thing because in order to know what system you need to play, you have to play a lot of systems and so on and so on. Yes. So you could look at what other people have played in similar settings. You could it's pretty much maybe reaching out to people that know more systems, try to figure out what they'd recommend for you. Thing like, go on Reddit and like, hey, I want to play this kind of game. What kind of systems would you guys recommend? Then you filter out the D&D stuff that usually comes up, and then you can have 5-10 different systems. You can go through and look at it and what does it offer? What is the system about? Like if you want to have a game about intrigue, you look with systems that support intrigue. If you want to have exploration, you look for systems that support exploration.
Yes.
In general, you can find systems like similar genres. Like for example, you want to do space exploration. What media has space exploration? You have Star Trek, for example, or Expanse, or what have you. What systems have people done for these things? Star Trek, you can have Star Trek Adventures. For Expanse, you might have Traveler, what have you. So that, based on the similar media to what you want to accomplish, you could find some RPGs that are a little bit more varied, and then you can look at them and see whether that works for you or not. So there's some connections you can make to go from your concept to interesting systems you might want to try.
For sure. Great answer. Could you talk a little bit about the systems that we haven't covered? So you've covered Exalted and Fellowship and Godbound a little bit as well. But Star Trek Adventures, you mentioned a little bit. I kept seeing this thing on your website, and I wasn't sure what it meant. So I would love for you to go a little bit in depth to just explain to me what it means when you say dogs in Ravnica, like DOGS set in Ravnica. So you're combining systems here, or?
So first of all, dogs. There was a game called Dogs in the Vineyard, which was about being, as far as I remember, I haven't played the actual one, but you were sort of religious missionaries going into the Wild West and being gunslingers / lawbringers / what have you. That system was very tied to its setting, so it can reinforce itself and what have you. And then people made, let's take this and let's make this more generic. So we have dogs, just dogs in capital letters, which, as I'm looking here, stands for Dice Pools and Moral Predicament-Based Generic Role-Playing System, which is just...
That's a mouthful.
Definitely it's a mouthful, but, that's what kind of you have, when people make indie games, they want to be inspired by that, they want to put something in. Sometimes you have something like that coming up. So it's a system, again, about... it's a generic system where you can accomplish a lot of things. It thinks it's about... you have a dice pool, you roll it, and then you pick dice to attack an enemy. They have to respond with raising the number based on the dice they rolled, and so on and so on. It's a neat enough generic systems with an interesting resolution mechanic. what we tend to do is we take various systems and mash them with a genre that we want to play. So, for example, we've done Exalted in Godbound. We've done Exalted in Broken World, which, funny enough, inspired a whole RPG called Karandun. What else I don't know, let me take my notes. We've done Ravenloft in Savage World and Chronicles of Darkness. We've done Habut in Mouse Guard, and Ravnica in Dogs. So, Ravnica is a setting for D&D, but a setting from Magic the Gathering, which one of our GMs wanted to play in that setting, but wanted something that's more investigative, more not necessarily combat-based. So you can have solutions based on you talking to people, you breaking up a gang, or what have you. So we took Dogs. Which means we make a characters, we sort of figure out what would work in the system, there's magic in the system because it's, of course, Magic the Gathering, you've got planeswalkers and what have you. So, we represent this by some dice pool. We represent being a investigator by another dice pool, and what have you. And then we played with that system rather than... So we take the setting for Ravnica, we just take the fluff, we take the races, the kind of character ideas, the setting. But we ignore all the system, and we replace it with the system of Dogs. And, it was a fun, a little bit wacky game where we have, Kiryu from Yakuza playing in a magical city, you have just artist, cow person that, we had a whole episode where it was just a painter defending their work against some really snobby critics, played by two of our most snarky players there, and it was awesome just watching the character break down in the end because,
I love when an entire session is just dedicated to a bit. That's some of my favorite RPG moments. Incredible.
Yeah, we definitely like doing bits. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. Like we had a game in Exalted called Congenials. We played that mostly in Godbound. It was you're heroes in this swords and sandals setting. You're doing your things. You're fighting some kaijus and what have you. One of the sessions we decided, hey, let's go something wacky, let's do Everybody is John, but let's put it in the setting. Because we had a character that was a Getimian Exalted, which has fate spiders weaving the threads of fate inside of them. That's the whole lore stuff. So, they're hearing...
You're just throwing these crazy concepts at me. It's just that's casual thing. It's just what we do.
Well, Exalted is a setting that's been around for 20 years. It has 20 years of development and baggage and what have you, and just keeps piling on itself. It's if I started talking to you about D&D and then talk about Ravenloft and how there are evil forces that keep being people there and everything's miserable and so on and so on, and there's cursed people there. That's the similar kind of thing.
Right.
But anyway, we had this character that was hearing voices in his head. So we played Everyone is John, which is a small, I think, one-page game about multiple people playing the same character. Just you go in, you're a different type of personality, you go try to accomplish your goal, and there are rules for when someone switches. So I might be a hedonist, so I want to go and get drunk, and they have a drunk person, and then someone that wants to go to work takes over, but they're having a hangover character, so they stumble in to work drunk because they need to accomplish this task and whatever, and it was a blast.
That sounds super fun.
Yeah. And in the same system, by accident, we created what we call Exalted without Exalt, which is inspired kind of by Garfield minus Garfield. Because by accident our GM just recorded their own side of the recording and all the players' recording was gone, so we had to put out that episode, but just the GM talking. And luckily we had a very good GM Devin, and by just his descriptions, reactions, and everything, you can sort of follow along with what everyone's doing. Like, oh, yes, that would work. Yeah, you can convince them. Sure, roll this for me. Yes, okay, so with this investigation, you figure out this and this and this, and this whole episode of just the GM talking.
So it's like a build your own TTRPG adventure.
Garfield minus Garfield.
Yeah.
You heard of that comic?
Oh yeah. I love Garfield. all the goofy spin-offs of Garfield is amazing. Exalting indeed. But yeah, I mean that's awesome. Now I want to jump from talking about these systems to another thing that you do, which is your RPG blog. Which I had, the pleasure of reading a couple articles from there. And so I wanted to just ask a couple questions about what draws you to blogging about role-playing games as a hobby when you are already deep in playing them and making podcasts and such. What makes you wanna, but I also want to write these in-depth pieces about these games?
Yeah. Well, it's like if you're doing an actual play, the focus is on the play part. So you're role playing, you have a little bit of table chatter, and what have you. So sometimes you run across some ideas that are bigger than this game that you're playing. Because, sure, you can spend the next hour ranting about something, which might not be for everybody to listen to, and what have you. And unlike a lot of modern online media tells you video isn't the best way to consume a lot of content, especially when it's like something deeper, something that you want to think about, something that you want to research your own pace. Writing is still better for that. So
you're telling me I shouldn't get all my information from a 6-second TikTok?
Well, if they do TikTok, maybe, but
no, I agree. I love reading. I love reading big articles, which is why I had such a good time reading the stuff you've written on your blog. I thought it was very interesting and very easy to follow along with.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
So sometimes
go on.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. So sometimes some things come up during the game that warrant its own thinking or exploration, deeper dive. For example, we had a game in Godbound, in our Affecting Epistle game, where we had a character that had the word of Dragonbound, which means they have the powers of the dragon. So you can play something like Smog as a starting level character, with all the implications, which means, sure, you can fly, you can breathe fire, and you are an army killer. Lake Town is your normal enemies. You fly over them, you murder them. And we had a game where we had a combat. Okay, here there's an army coming. Okay, I look at my character sheet, I have this power where if I attack any army unit, which is in Global have, instead of individual enemies, you have sometimes an army block to represent, okay, this is 100 people that are fighting you. So you don't have to go into such small details. Yeah, and we had a power if the enemies individual are very weak, so if they're basic soldiers, if you attack a group, the whole group dies instantly. No roll, no damage roll, no nothing. You just kill them because you are a dragon, you are an army killer, they're mooks. And I was like, okay, this was my resolution to this combat, and it didn't feel that satisfying because, hey, I wanted to have a fight with an army. I wanted to, be able to, fight them, but I wanted some opposition to my character, which led me to thinking, okay, can you have powers in games that are too fun to be, too good to be useful, as I put it? And yeah, there are some things where you negate an entire type of encounter, you negate an entire problem entirely. When you have powers like that, usually they're not that fun. We had a different game. We were playing Godbound in the Ankalia setting, which was the Living Years game. that setting is a zombie post-apocalyptic Victorian era Mongolia-esque setting, something like that. But we had a character that had a ward of death bound, which means they commanded the undead like some sort of super lich. Like, fighting zombies wasn't an issue. They just bowed down and, accepted this power of this greater being right there standing. Which means that we didn't engage with the zombie apocalypse part of the setting, because whenever something undead will show up, it wouldn't be a challenge, it will be a walkover.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a drawback if you have such powers that just trivialize a large part of the setting, large part of a challenge, or what have you.
For sure. And I think that's very interesting. I haven't had the pleasure of playing in the kind of systems that you mentioned, but I I have played very high level D&D before, and that brings similar challenges, right? Where the players sometimes have like, oh, well, I throw this giant enemy at them. Okay, well, I teleport them into an alternate space. Now they're gone and goodbye. That took 5 seconds.
I think the most popular example in Dungeons and Dragons from here is like, oh, if you want to have a survival game, don't let your characters take good berry, because that solves survival.
Solves everything, yeah. Or if you want to do Curse of Strahd, right? Don't allow a team of paladins, because then the setting is ruined, right? That's exactly. Yeah, certain things can definitely be too good to be fun. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Can you share your process as an RPG blogger for when you evaluate and critique tabletop games? Sort of like what to focus on and how to convey your opinions and like what's good, what's bad. So
I don't think I have done a little bit of RPG system critique every now and then. I think the first one I've done was Contact, which was the German RPG that wanted to recreate the original first XCOM with a hyphen that was right back in the DOS. And I think they want to recreate it one by one because the crunch of the system pretty much feels like it. But I haven't done that many RPG system critiques. I probably should, because we play.
Well, yes, but not just system critiques, but just your general process of evaluating and critiquing like actual play games. And because I read your Dimension 20 blog, right? I read your Fantasy High Season 1 review, and I thought the way that you broke it down was really interesting. So that's also something I would like to know more about.
Well, I guess there are two things there. I set out to do the actual reviews of the full games of various exalted actual plays. One thing, and then the other thing is sometimes I watch other podcasts and then okay, there's an idea here or an episode or a scene situation that I want to talk and elaborate on, which was that Dimension 20's Fantasy High, season 1, episode 1 and 2. That was mostly okay, there's a negative idea that I want to focus on and go for it. So if I see something that engages me, that's interesting, to have thoughts on and want to explain, start with okay, what do I want to talk about, start elaborating the topic and what have you. And when I'm talking about such ideas, that okay, this is a singular idea from this larger game. This isn't reflective of the whole game. Don't in general, when I'm reviewing the actual plays, usually the smaller groups, more indie, they're smaller than Dimension 20, is smaller than Critical Role. Yeah. So with all such things, you have, don't punch down. It's don't attack the players, don't attack, the show itself, whatever. Don't try to value judge them, because hey, everybody's here, for the fun. Sometimes you have a good idea, but in practice it doesn't work out. So, separate what's in the media from the people making the media, unless they're actual assholes, but that's a separate thing. We don't even engage with that. So I tend to focus on like the ideas presented, or like what someone's been trying to accomplish, and figure out did they accomplish something like that. So, for example, you had what's called the Exaltwitch Academy. Yeah, I think that's what it was called, which is like an exalted game set in like the style, which should have like high dynasty characters in a military academy. Like, oh, you started the game, and it's like, okay, you guys will be, recruits. You guys going to be like in, your 5th years or whatever, studying this military academy. Going to be back and forth. There'll be some like drama between the characters. There'll be some interactions. You make some enemies and what have you. So that's the setup of the game. That's what sometimes we're like, okay, let's see what this is about. Unfortunately, a few episodes in, it didn't start to like work out that much. I guess from what I've gathered. So the thing pivoted, like, oh, there's this big drama, the school's on fire, everything's like, the elections are cancelled because there's some assassin on the ground, doing shenanigans, what have you. And like, oh, okay, this is also interesting, but the shift from what you started, which is a little bit less engaging, to like going on with the idea and following through with that. Like, okay, I understand what's going on, but at the same time, like, oh, I was here for like, oh, maybe something inspired by like Harry Potter. We had spent a whole year in this study. Months go by, there's something building up with it. Like, no, this game, first season that was in the academy wrapped in like 2 weeks, which is like nothing in Exalted times.
Right.
Because things progressed fast, things escalated and what have you. So like, yeah. So you can definitely focus on like, okay, they set up to do this, they've done something different. Is this good? Is this better? What could you learn from this? What's like the takeaway here? It's like, oh, lesson here is like, if you're setting for something like, figure out whether that's actually what you're going, like maybe call it quits earlier, which, for example, we as audio-only podcast, we don't do streams, we record it and upload that, audio on demand. We have the luxury that we can record a few episodes, see whether it's working, or if not, we can scrap it, because there's no evidence of us doing that. But you're doing streams, and you're bound by people already seeing it, by being, broadcast and so on, so you have to commit it a bit earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Which, give or take, like, sometimes we have the luxury when we play like 2 games a week, releasing 1 game a week, which have a backlog. So we can actually start the game, record the whole season, and release it only after it's done, and also record the intro at the very end, so we know what we're expecting to people. Like, hey, this is the character, this is how it turns out. So we know the character's better, and so on, so on.
Sort of rounding out here, it's a bit of a generic question, I have to admit, but it's something I still feel like is very important, which is that, you do podcasts, you do blogging, you do more podcasting. Like, how do you manage the time to do all these things? Like, how do you schedule all of this around, also living a life and staying motivated to do all these things, and not, because I'm sure it's a ton of work.
Well, we're luckily a fun podcast, which means, we don't have as much pressure. Like, oh, we don't chase metrics. We don't need to earn enough keep so that we don't have to do anything else. Which means, okay, this is more relaxed. We barely do any editing. Like, oh, recently we started doing audio passes to make sure that, there's noise cancellation going on and what have you. In general, it's a lot less stress than somebody like Dimension 20 or what have you that's doing this for the living. In general, our schedule is, we try to keep it kind of consistent. Like, oh, we do evenings usually, like record from 6 to 9 or things like that. We just go, okay, every Thursday we meet and we do this. And through a process of like a little bit of selection, we tend to game with people that have more consistent schedules. And then, if we know that people can keep the schedule, then okay, we do it more and more with the same people. So like, a little bit of selection. Like, if you flake out in the middle of it, and well, okay, sure, that's acceptable. We can, remove the character, maybe bring someone in. But maybe next time, we'll think twice about inviting you because, we want to have games that actually reach conclusion and what have you. It's like, okay, if things change, sure, we can reconsider it. Like we didn't have that many bad people. I don't think we have anyone that was like, really bad on our podcast. So it's like, working out. Like, people want to be here. People already know what they're getting into because they've listened to our things. And like, hey, you're a celebrity voice actor. Would you like to play this game that would require 5 hours of your time uninterrupted every week? Like, do you sign up for this? Which is its own thing.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and
hello, Mr. Matt Mercer. Would you like to meet
well, Matt Mercer already knows where they're coming from. But sometimes you see some podcasts that, we are an improv amateur voice actors, what have you, want to do improv voice acting, and it doesn't necessarily work out because sometimes like, for improv, like you do yes and a lot, and you follow up, you do more of that, you escalate and have you, which sometimes you can't keep in an RPG because things can escalate too much, or you might break something and you have to deal with it, or like you can't really, say I'm acting.
Yes, it takes a very good improviser to know when the improv is getting too wild. And
like for example, if I'm acting that my character is angry at your character, that works cool for like, half an hour, do it, finish the thing. But if I want to keep that for a longer time, then I have to be angry at you for weeks on end, and it might not come out that well in the actual podcast. Like, bleed, for example, is something that we've noticed a very important thing to take care of. Like in our exalted Prince of the Universe, big game about like big ambitions, big egos, and so on. I've noticed listening back to it that there was a little bit of bleed where how we act in character translates to how we act out of character as well towards each other, and there's some resentment building, that there's some stress outside of the game, or what have you. So you need to understand that something like that might be going, that you need to manage that and what have you.
Of course.
Which, so going back to our original topic, we tend to like say, okay, we're playing from this time to this time. Who can fit in this slot? If people can't agree, then maybe we change the team a little bit. Saying, okay, who can do Fridays? We pick you that can do Fridays, and can consistently, repeatedly, we schedule it and try to meet at the same time, the same kind of setup, and what have you.
So consistency in scheduling, that's goes a long way.
Like, definitely setting up, organizations. You need someone that can do organizing. So like keeping notes, keeping everything on Google Drive, for example, in the same folder. Very useful to have all the characters there. Have a battle sheet for managing that. That's useful for online games in general. Other than that, if you want to save yourself headache of editing down the line, you make sure that when you record, things are already better. Like recently, you started pushing people to do noise cancellation on their end, so that the audio comes in clear. So you don't have to remove the noise, you don't have to edit around crackling sounds because someone played with a bag, what have you.
Yes.
So a little bit of setup saves you a lot of time later down in the editing. Or like, if you record things well, you can do it like in one take, and you don't have to do anything like, you start with something. If you need to pause, you pause, tuck things out between yourselves, then resume recording when you're ready and ready to go. So you don't have to edit that chunk out, I'll tell you. Of course, our style of recording, presenting isn't for everybody. Our games are like 3 hours. They used to be way longer, but we've cut down on it. So about 3 hours of content, and it's usually we do small breaks. But it's like, if there's table chatter, we talk about it. That's how we roll. You know,
No,
if you
no pun
consume it
intended.
just if you consume actual plays that are more edited, they usually takes a lot more time to cut out the middle parts, stitch things together, and they are more enjoyable to consume. Sure, like for example, Swallows of the South is another exalted indie, hobby recording podcast. Their episodes were like half an hour, tightly edited from an actual game, and it was really nice, neat, bite-sized things to enjoy. Our games in the meantime were 6 hours long, and they were slugged, and it had everything in, all the chatter and everything. It's like, okay, different kinds of a game for different people. If you have the time to do editing, sure, you do editing and you make something more enjoyable. If you don't, well, you can put the raws out and maybe someone will enjoy it, which is our approach, because hey, we're doing this as a hobby. We don't have time to listen to our own episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoyed when I was doing research for the show. I sat and wrote questions and read stuff, and all the while the podcast was in my ears, and I quite enjoyed that. I thought that was great. Well, Peter, I think that's a pretty decent point to end it on, and I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming on, and I thought it was a really good time, and I have a lot of things I need to check out now, a lot of games I need to read up on to maybe try for myself. And if you, dear viewer, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in all of Peter's many projects, they will all be linked in the description, as well as some reading material for the various games that we talked about today. So, any final words?
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Absolutely, and we'll stay in touch for sure. And it was great to talk to you. That's the show, everyone. Thank you for watching. Leave a like and comment on which one of these crazy games you would like to play in the most. Bye bye. All right. Well, thank you so much. Outside of recording again, I appreciate it very much. So, and I will. I'll let you know when
it's posted.
When it's posted. Yeah, it usually takes me a while because
no problem.
editing and
full-time
job and all.